Hey, hello everyone. How's it going?
Good morning.
Good afternoon or evening,
Good evening.
whatever it is for you.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I stole
You
that.
guys have the
I always
you
forget.
guys have like I know it's hard like sometimes we'll call some friends in Ethiopia and this now with daylight saving time it's 11 hours different. So I usually call in the morning time here and it's nighttime there. So I always say good evening and then that person on the line says good morning. It's just like what we just did. You cover it all in one call. It's perfect. You ask them how the day went so you can kind of prepare for it. How's the day going to go? Go pretty good. It's so cheesy. I do it every single time. I don't know why.
They're also like, what year is it according to their calendar?
I think they're like seven years different. So it's like 2000, coming up on 2013 there, I think, or maybe 2014 is going to be the new year. I don't know.
You'll have to warn them about 2020.
I know. Yeah. Hey guys,
Yeah.
in a few years, and their calendar is a 13-month calendar. So everything's a little, yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Interesting.
cool. Well, listen, we're gonna jump into this conversation. Say what?
Say what?
What? We're in a series of the good news. Mason, you gave the message yesterday. What is the gospel? Trying to answer that question, both what it isn't and what it is, and just appreciated your message very much. I'd love for you to kind of give us an overview of it, and then we've got some nearly impossible questions for you to answer, and then we will just take it from there. But yeah, I was really jazzed by that because this is something that we as a team have been talking about, and I think probably every follower of Jesus needs to be talking about, like what is the gospel and how do we try to explain it? How do we live it out? How do we share it and all that? So yeah, just kind of give us a recap and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Do you guys hear my kid? Do you hear Mila? I think she's in timeout. I think she's in timeout right outside my door. So
Pretty standard.
It's pretty standard around here. It is what it is. Okay, yeah, quick recap of yesterday's message. I basically recapped a talk that I heard from a friend of mine that changed the way that I think about the gospel. And so, when I met Jesus, I met Jesus the way that many people have, which was a simple declaration of the good news that Jesus can save me, that I have sinned, that my sin makes me deserving of wrath, and Jesus steps in that gap, and he is the rescuer, and that's good news. That's how I met Jesus. That's how anyone who ever got saved at a Billy Graham crusade met Jesus. Millions of people have met Jesus through that simple declaration. Yeah. So it's good news. We have to hold on to that so tight. But I think there's some danger in saying that is the good news, period. That might be the entrance into the depths of the good news. But that is, I would argue, part of the good news. And when we say that a simple phrase like Jesus saves is it, period, that's the good news that we carry, then a couple things happen. Typically when we talk about Jesus saving, we're thinking about eternity. And so it's good news that doesn't really apply today. We're just asking people to make a decision and then hold on to it because it's going to come in handy when they die. Not always, but often that's how that's cast. And then another issue is that we think we have the whole gospel figured out. We know it, so there's no need to continue seeking and enjoying the goodness of God that he wants to give to us. Yeah. And then a third issue that I didn't get into yesterday, but that's important, is that we lose the need to contextualize the gospel. And so we think that we can basically just we can I don't want to say hit people over the head, but we can take this phrase and just use it indiscriminately and think that we've preached the gospel, which we have, technically speaking. But I think there's such beauty in listening to people's story and asking, like, man, is this person afraid that, you know, they don't know what's going to happen to them when they die? Or are they saying, man, I just feel like nothing in this world can satisfy me? We're listening to other people's stories and then speaking the good news into that. And so when the good news is simply Jesus saves, somebody can say, man, my kid is sick. And we can say, well, Jesus saves, which is technically the gospel and it's good news. But in that moment, I'm not sure it's received that way. And I'm not sure that's the heart it's coming from. Whereas if we're listening to people's stories and we're asking, man, what aspect of the grandness of the gospel, like what aspect needs to be spoken into this moment for this person? What part of the goodness of God do they need to hear about right now? So we lose that when we think that the gospel is a simple phrase that we can slap on a bumper sticker or hold in the end zone or put over the freeway or whatever. It's good news. And some people who see it need to hear it in that moment, but many people need to see that diamond that is the gospel from a different angle in that moment, depending on what their heart's crying out for. So that was the tension I set up yesterday. And then I just shared 5 words that are not the gospel in its fullness, but I think are a good start, which is that Jesus saves, that he sustains. In other words, he keeps saving. He didn't just save you when you went to the altar or whatever. He's been with you every day since, holding you up, continuing to offer you salvation on a daily basis. I think that we have a good understanding in the church. I had a good understanding, when I first started following Jesus, about past grace, been saved from what I did, and future grace. I'll be given grace when I die. But this idea of present grace today, the grace that he gives us just to get through another day. So Jesus saves, he sustains, he sanctifies, which is that churchy word for being made more whole, made holy, made into the image of Christ, as the scriptures say. I think a lot of people, including myself, we try to do that on our own, and that's exhausting. Yeah. So I talked a bit about that. We certainly have a role to play in that process. But man, he does the sanctifying at the end of the day. It's through the Holy Spirit that happens. He satisfies, which is a big one. That's the aspect of the gospel that I think most days, if you ask me, man, what's hard for you in life right now? What are you finding yourself straying away from Jesus looking for? I'm usually not looking for something else to save me. This is me personally speaking. I'm not usually looking for something else to save me, but I'm usually looking for other things to satisfy me. And he's the ultimate source of satisfaction. And then finally, Jesus, he sends us. He tells us to go. It's Matthew 28. As you go, make disciples. Tell other people about the good news and baptize them. And so we've been given a mission. We've been given all this good news, and then we've been told to receive it, to rest in it, and also to take it with us wherever we go, because there's other people who need to hear it. So that's kind of the summary.
That's awesome. Before you got into those 5 words in your message, you addressed what the gospel is not, and I thought that was people can listen to that message, and they need to. If you haven't listened to the message, just find it here on the channel, and take some time to listen to it. But real quickly, Mason, what were those 3? I think it was 3. Yeah, you said 3 things the gospel was not. I thought those were really. You talk, in terms of contextualizing the gospel, that was a great way of addressing what maybe a lot of people fall into or think the gospel is.
Man, yeah, definitely. So I gave, when I was writing this message, I just felt like there was a few things these are things that I think when I was preaching, I was kind of calling these things out, but I'm calling them out in myself, because these are 3 ways that I tend to veer from what I think the gospel is, which is it's a declaration. So like when Romans would occupy new territory, Roman soldiers would go into that new territory and bring gospel. It was a word they would use, implying there's new authority in this place. It was a declaration. But I think that I find myself thinking about the gospel in a few different ways, and I've heard it. I don't think I'm the only one. The first one I gave was good vibes. The gospel is synonymous with good vibes, which is just like good attitudes, happy feelings. And I think the gospel is good news that often resonates really deeply. But man, even if I can just really quickly, even today, in Romans, let's see. Yeah, Paul says in Romans 2, I just read this today. I was thinking about this good vibes thing. Paul says, this will all take place on the day when God judges people's secrets, as my gospel declares. Like, that doesn't sound like good vibes. That sounds like, what the heck does that mean? Like you're judging our secrets. So I think so often the gospel brings with it, it taps into the deepest part of our spirit and what we were created to hear and know. So often I think it does resonate as good news. But if we put it in that box and say it's not the gospel unless it feels good and sounds good, I think we'll miss it, because sometimes it's good news to be called out for the things that we think are good for us. Jesus lovingly says some hard things. The good news doesn't always it doesn't always bring about these good vibes like other things might, although it often does, but it's not synonymous. That was the first one. Second one was good luck. And what I mean by that is, I think sometimes I will kind of use the gospel like it's a genie in a bottle. Like, I will call, and this is a fine line, because it's good to call on the nature of God in prayer, but sometimes I find myself pulling out even just the word gospel, Bible sounding words, or the gospel itself, as like, I think if I say these things or recite these things or bring these things up, then God will answer these prayers over here, or something like that. So I find myself at times using it like it's a good luck charm. And like, if I just remember this thing, things will go my way. Whereas, Jesus is the fullness. He is the good news. He understood the good news like nobody else. And his life ended before his resurrection. His life ended in a way that you wouldn't say was good luck. So understanding the gospel doesn't always bring about good luck in life. And then finally, good advice. And this is the one that I find myself, and this again this is a fine line too, but I think that I think the declaration of truth is different than good advice on how we should act in certain situations, or wisdom even. Again, that's a fine line. I think the gospel is wisdom in and of itself, but the gospel, I've said it already, it's a declaration it's a statement of fact that changes everything, as opposed to, here's how you should apply this thing to your situation to kind of get the result that you're wanting to come out on the other end. It's not part of the equation. It's the whole subject itself. So yeah, the gospel is not good vibes. It's not good luck. It's not good advice. It's a declaration of good news that changes everything.
So
That being said, again, that's a fine line, because I think that we need to listen to people's stories and then speak the gospel into their unique circumstances in that moment, or maybe in the grand scheme of their life, like the things that they're carrying from their past or whatever. So it does need to be spoken uniquely, I think, to individual people. And certainly at some point we have to talk about the fact that Jesus saves, even if that's not maybe the first approach we take or whatever it is. But that's a little different, I think, than giving good advice and calling it the gospel. So for example, okay, can I give a quick example? I'm talking a little too much, but here would be a great example. I think if we, and it's not a bad thing to give good advice or to give wisdom. It's not a bad thing at all, but it can be tricky if we confuse good news and good advice. So if I preach a sermon that's all about marriage and how to have a healthy marriage, and that's kind of it, and I give some points on how to have a healthy marriage, and I think I've done a good job at giving, hopefully, I don't know, maybe one of you guys, with your years of being married, some good advice and some good wisdom. But to also preach good news would be to tie that marriage in. Scripture does this all the time. Jesus is described as a husband to us, to the church, which is his bride. So good advice would be, here's how to have a healthier marriage. And the two can coexist. Good news might be, Jesus is the greatest husband to this bride, and he's faithful to his bride. He doesn't leave his bride. While his bride might have questions and veer off and have uncertainties about how committed she is to the relationship, he doesn't ever leave. He cares for her. So there's a little bit of a difference there. And I think often they coexist, but one is this declaration of good news. The other is good advice. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense or if that's helpful, but
Yeah.
And she's always right. That's the other one. Just keep that in mind. She's always right.
I don't know if that applies in this metaphor, but maybe.
It always applies.
Out of the metaphor. I'm back to I'm just the giver of good advice right now. That's all.
It always applies.
That's not always good news, but that's the way it is.
You know, when you were going through that list in your message, I found myself trying to predict what the next one was going to be. You know, it's not sure. Good vibes, it's not good luck. Yeah. And I was convinced I had number 3 nailed. I thought for sure it was going to be good works.
Oh.
But you said, yeah, well, you obviously good advice was good as well. My question to you, as let's just say good works was one of them. Mm-hmm. What would you say to somebody that is trying to anchor their relationship with Christ in the gospel? They don't ever want to move away from the good news in terms of like their sanctification, where they find their satisfaction, the fact that they are sent.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile is not the right word, but I think for a lot of people, we can find ourselves drifting into our own effort as it relates to whether it be spiritual disciplines or our own witness or whatever. How do you stay anchored in the gospel that it is Jesus doing the work, and yet, you know, I have to participate to some degree.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. That's maybe something that I struggle with.
Yeah, definitely. And that's such a good, I should have used that point. That's a good one. And there's a lot to say. I mean, at its core, the question you're answering or asking is kind of an age-old question between the relationship between grace, undeserved, unmerited grace, and the role that we play in this whole thing. And that's a fine line. I'd say a couple, these are all just scattered thoughts. You know, I haven't heard that question until now. So one of my favorite quotes is by an author named Dallas Willard. And this is just helpful for clarity's sake for me, or at least some of the nuance clarifies a bit. He says, grace is opposed to earning, but not effort. So, you know, grace and earning can't live together, but grace and effort can live together. So the vibe that I get from the New Testament writers is James is a great one to consider. Romans 2, Paul gets into this, but there is a relationship between grace and works, but it seems to be like, you know, Paul says, test yourself to see if you're in the faith. It's like nothing, scripture says that anything we could bring to God and say, look what we've done, is essentially in that moment, it's worthless. It, you know, it will never measure up. And yet at the same time, you know, it's what I like to call both and. Like, our works mean nothing if we're bringing them to God, like, look, I've earned your love. And yet our works mean everything. Personally, if we look at ourselves and say, like, how much do I believe the good news? And is that belief working itself out in my life naturally? One of my favorite, you know, I think a parable Jesus tells that gets right kind of to the core of this is his parable about, well, I don't know if you'd call it a parable, but he says, you know, come to me if you're tired, heavy burdened, I'll give you rest. And what's interesting is he doesn't, one author says, you'd expect Jesus to give you a pillow in that moment. Like, come to me, I'll give you rest. Here's a bed, here's a pillow. But instead he says, take my yoke upon you. And a yoke, from what I understand of it, was a agrarian tool used in farming that would it would go over two oxen who would walk side by side and basically plow the ground. And so Jesus basically says, like, share this yoke with me, but I'll do the heavy lifting. So I don't know, it's not a really clean answer, but I think that if we ever find ourselves saying, I think we find both these extremes in Scripture. Paul gets into it in Corinthians. James gets into it in the book of James. Paul gets into it a bit in Romans 2. There's other places too. But if we ever find ourselves saying, it's just grace, 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 but our life doesn't look changed at all, then that should cause us to consider, do I believe this just intellectually, or do I believe in Jesus the way the scriptures mean that word believe? Like, am I giving my whole self to this thing? Am I asking him to help me? I think a good place to start is just like, Jesus, is there anything you want me to do today? Anything you want me to change about the way I speak or my habits or whatever? And then if we can also swing to the other extreme where it's like we're finding ourselves always like, God, have I done enough for you today? Are you pleased with me today? So I would say, not speaking like theologically, but just pastorally, if somebody's, depending on what category you tend to swing to, I'd find a way to daily remind yourself of the truth on the other end of that spectrum. So for those of you that feel like you really understand the concept of grace, but your life is totally unchanged, Paul has those great words like, everything's permissible for you. Everything's okay. You're in Christ and you're forgiven. But like, not everything's helpful. And are you living for yourself and just saying, I can do whatever I want? Or are you asking what's best for the people around me? How can I best love and serve them? And then if you find yourself on the other side of the spectrum, like every day you wake up feeling like you owe something to God, he's upset with you because of what you did yesterday or whatever, then man, a good place to start is reminding yourself of the gospel. Both sides need to remind themselves of the gospel. First side needs to remind themselves like, yes, there's grace, but I'm sent and I'm supposed to live a certain way to be salt and light in my neighborhood, to my neighbors, to invite other people to know Jesus. The other side needs to be like, man, I need to be reminded today, remind myself that he saves me. I love, I might've said this recently when we were on one of these podcasts, but it struck me like a month ago that of all the accurate terms Jesus could have used to relate to God, he could have called God judge or warrior or like any of these things that God is called in the Old Testament, and they would have been accurate. But like, he chose to call him Father over and over and over and over. Like, it seems like Jesus wants us to get that. So if you find yourself on this side, like, have I done enough today? I think that when I find myself in that category, what I'm thinking is God kind of adopted me begrudgingly, when that's just not the case. He wants to be a father to a child. And in the same way that my kids sometimes disobey and need correction, and I do as well, he's faithful to do that because he loves us. So I don't know, I think I'm veering so far from your original question, but it's to your point, it's a hard line to find between, am I leaning into the gospel in this moment, or am I leaning into works in this moment? The last thing I'll say about it is this. I think that doing good works, the opportunity to do good works, is part of the gospel in and of itself. So I wouldn't pit gospel and works against each other. In fact, like, good works kind of sounds like a bad term in the church today, but Jesus uses it as a good thing. It's good to do good works. It's good to be a good person and do kind things for people. So I think when we pit like good news is over here and good works are over here, that's not always helpful, unless good works is us trying to earn something. But part of living into the gospel and the gospel life and receiving what God has for us is being set free to do good works. We don't have to hold on to anger anymore. We can love people, and we don't have to look for our identity by what other people say to us. So we're free to not give and let everyone know that we're giving, but to give in secret. Like there's something about that we're able to do because of the gospel, because our identity is coming from God in secret. Like we don't even have to tell anybody else that we're praying or that we're giving or whatever. So that's the last thing I'll say. I think that good works is part of the gospel, but it's kind of like playing with fire. And I'm with anybody who feels like they sometimes veer to one side or the other. And I kind of feel like I'm always course correcting, but like he's faithful. He sustains us, you know, he didn't just save us and now he's watching from afar, like, where are you going to land? Every single minute of every day, he's helping us course correct all the time. So it's a long answer to your question, but
Yeah, that's good. I mean, it is. I think it just comes back to even what you said, kind of at the latter end of your message, in just the ability to change one's heart, and
yeah,
that's the business that you. And as our heart and the motivation of our heart and the intention of our heart begins to be changed by him, like
yeah,
that's the thing that's going to compel us to want to do um to listen and obey and do the things that we're commanded to in scripture. And it's not out of compulsion, it's not out of I'm just supposed to do this to check this box. Like it's really out of a transformed heart and a desire and a desire and a joy to help people and to serve God in that capacity. So it's not like we do have to check our motivations, and we have to check if we are trying to like earn something, but and maybe that's a good question to always keep in mind if we find ourselves, because I fall in that same category. I'm a doer. I like to be active and to be helpful, and I just always have to check it's not ever bad. It's just what's the motivation and who's the glory getting attributed to.
yeah,
As well. So
yeah,
it's good. It's good to do good. It's good to know that that hopefully is coming from a heart that's being transformed and wanting to just co-labor with Jesus, you know, yoked with him. I like that. Getting rest isn't necessarily like sleeping, although that is part of getting rest. Getting rest is doing things in step with Jesus, his way,
yeah,
side by side.
yeah,
It's interesting.
yeah,
Never quite thought about that way. It's very cool.
yeah.
I love that you brought that up, the yoke of Christ. They would take a mature ox and they would match an immature ox with that, so that as the master was driving the oxen, the younger one would learn what the response of the more mature ox was to the commands.
Of the
So
master.
as the master was verbally
Wow.
commanding them, and
Wow.
the more mature one had already been through that maturing process, and so they would match. The other thing that's interesting is that when a rabbi would have a unique, like you wouldn't become you know how when you earn your PhD, you
No.
contribute you contribute something to the body of knowledge that is brand new.
Sure. Yeah.
So your research or whatever is it's your research, your PhD project is unique. It stands alone. So you've contributed to the body of knowledge worldwide that nobody else has done. This is your PhD contribution.
Yeah.
Well, the same way, when a rabbi would become a rabbi, they would have a unique twist on the Torah, and that became their yoke. That was that they called that rabbi's yoke. So when Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light," he was saying, unlike every other rabbi that would add to what's required of you,
Wow.
my yoke is fulfilled in me.
Wow.
And so there's kind of a dual thing there that it's at play. And to your point, like when you quoted Dallas Willard, I was actually hoping you would, because that's one of my favorite quotes to try to make sense of the age-old works versus
Yeah.
grace debate. That it's not the works is not grace as opposed to earning, not effort. I like that. So helpful to me.
You know, I was talking with somebody about this the other day, and I just remember this conversation. A helpful place to look to is, so you read the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And it's full of commands on how followers of Jesus are to live in the kingdom as a new people, as a new society. And then you get to the end of it, and there's this really interesting exchange where, and I brought this passage up in my message, but there's these people who say to Jesus, you know, at the end of all things, man, didn't we do all these things in your name? We were like casting out demons and prophesying. And you would think Jesus just finished saying, here's all the stuff you're supposed to do. So the natural response might be at the end of all things, when we meet Jesus, to say, here's all the stuff I did. And then he kind of has this weird, he flips it upside down. He's like, he tells these people, I don't know you. And on the reverse side, he says, no one goes in the kingdom except those who do the will of my Father. And then he says, then there's these people who do some things. And then he says, I don't know you though. So I've been working through that. And I think Jesus is getting at the will of the Father is for us to know Jesus. And so what can happen is the Sermon on the Mount can be an example, but good works in general, we should engage in them, but it's out of the right heart, like Nathan mentioned. So one heart would be, when we meet Jesus at the end, we say, look at all the boxes I checked and the things I did. And that's to totally miss the point. On the other hand, I was processing out loud. I'm an outward processor. When I was talking to this person, I was like, I wonder if the Sermon on the Mount is kind of like Jesus is telling us the Father's personality type. And it's not like, here's the things you need to do so that at the end you can get in. But it's God saying, here's how I connect with people. Here's like, if you want to know me relationally, like here's some of the best ways that I love to engage with human beings. So when you pray and you're standing out on the street corner praying, you're praying in that moment so that everyone around you hears you and they think you're really good at praying or whatever. But instead, like, go in your room and close the door. Don't perform. And so we can take that like, okay, today I prayed in my room and I didn't perform. I hope God likes me. Or like, man, I was alone in prayer. I wasn't trying to get all the right words. I wasn't afraid to show God my whole heart. And like, we knew each other in that moment. Like our relationship is growing. So like, I think good works, and that's kind of coming full circle. I think good works are a gift. It's part of the gospel. We've been told God loves to engage with people and through people in the way that we love other human beings, in the way that we provide for them and care for them, in the way that we get alone and pray with God and all these things. And so that's a grace. Like good works are a grace. It's such a beautiful way to connect with other human beings and to connect with God himself. But when we take those good works and we flip them and we think, maybe God will like me today if I do enough of this stuff, then we've missed the point.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah, I think, that's really profound. There was, you could email your questions in, and last week's podcast we recorded at a different time than normal, and we missed this question because we recorded it a day early. But I think it's relevant for this conversation as well. And this person writes in and says, during the sermon, I followed along with the comments. Everyone makes it seem, all caps, so easy. I do not find it easy to let go of everything and follow. I do not know how to develop a relationship and walk with Jesus. I hear it talked about, but I honestly struggle with just doing that. How do you, as believers, accept his good news so easily? How do you walk with Jesus so easily, as if you and I were meeting and talking? So there's a couple comments about it seems very easy just by tracking along with our comments on our, probably YouTube, maybe Facebook. And so it sounds like there's some, some knowledge there. I hear about it, talked about, but this person is just being very vulnerable and saying, I honestly struggle with doing just that. So the questions are, how do you as believers accept his good news so easily? How do you walk with Jesus so easily as if you and I were meeting and talking? So I think both you guys could comment on this because it came in after Scott's message, but I think it's still relevant for what Mason was talking about too.
Yeah. Okay, I'd say a couple things. Again, these are kind of scattered thoughts, but it's easy to think, watching people on screen, watching people type in comments or whatever, that this is easy. And it's not. You are not alone. I could tell you that the other places I look for satisfaction, the other places that I look for my salvation, that I look for my hope, the other places where I try to find my sense of mission and calling, like, and not just moments in my life, like today. I could tell you a couple times today that I've looked for things I should be finding in Jesus, other places. It's by no means easy. So when, I know this was after Scott's message, but I can just speak for me. Like when I get up to preach, I feel pretty good about my message. I've rehearsed it. It's genuine, it's honest thoughts, but it would feel a little different. Like you said, whoever sent in this question, if we were sitting across from each other over coffee, it's not easy. Following Jesus is not easy. And I think that I just want to encourage you. I noticed the other day I was reading about Jesus at the Last Supper, and he says, somebody sitting around the table is going to betray me today. And what's interesting is that actually there's two people who I think betrayed Jesus that day who were sitting around the table, if not all of them. One of them is Judas, who Jesus is referring to in that moment. And Judas uses Jesus for his own gain. And then there's another guy sitting around the table named Peter, who shortly after that meal denies 3 times that he even knows Jesus. He basically throws everything away. And I found it fascinating while I was reading that Jesus doesn't say there's 2 people around the table who are going to betray me. He says 1. And I think it's the heart posture that's different. Judas is, he's using Jesus for his own gain. Peter is scared. Peter doesn't know what to do in a moment like that. Later, when Peter sees Jesus resurrected, he's eager to see Jesus, even though he doesn't understand anything. So whoever sent in this question, I think you're in a good place. To be in a place where you're like, Jesus, I don't understand, but I want to understand. Oh, it's not easy to follow you, but I want to follow you. Like, that's a great place to be. It's scary when you hear people say following Jesus is really easy and I do it perfectly. Not that many people would say that, but if you find someone who says that, I'd be a little bit skeptical. And then you have other people who want to use Jesus for their own gain in some way. But I think the healthiest place to be is where you're at. And I totally validate your question. There's good answers for it. I'm sure Pastor Scott has some, but it's a good place to be, to wrestle, to ask, like, man, I want to follow you, but it's hard. I don't know what to do next. Can you help me? Like, those are the kind of people Jesus surrounds himself with, who are always in a position of learning and asking for help, instead of saying, I know it all, or I don't want to know anything. So continue asking. He says, like, if you seek, you'll find. If you knock, the door's going to be opened. So following Jesus is not as easy as other people might make it look, including myself, or that it might look when you're watching something on a screen. It's not easy. You're not alone. And it's a good place to be. It's a hard place to be, but it's good. Like, keep asking those questions, keep wrestling. That's what I would say. I don't mean to round about the question, but that's just a little encouragement, I hope.
Yeah, this.
I don't think I have much to add to that, other than what a great question that is, and I agree. It's, when you're looking on to something or somebody or whatever, it always appears that it's easy for them. When Russell Wilson does his thing, it appears very easy,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
or whatever context it is, and yet when you look under the hood, or you look at what it takes for people to do what they do, you realize, oh, there's a lot of struggle. And faith is similar in the sense that, you know, generally speaking, the people that are called to lead or teach are just a little more time under their uh, under the belt, whatever the phrase is, you know, and so, but that doesn't mean that the struggle's not there, or that it's not hard.
Yeah.
It's still a struggle. There's still, you know, there's still challenges with relationships. We're still trying to figure out marriage and how to be a good dad in my case, and you know, how to manage emotions and all that stuff. So yeah, I don't want to be, I hope this doesn't sound condescending to whoever wrote this in, but it your struggle is real, and just because it doesn't look like it's a struggle as you look on doesn't mean that it's not there for me or anybody else that's teaching or leading or whatever. So yeah.
There was yeah, thanks guys. There was a couple sentences in here that weren't necessarily a question, but I think we could just spend a couple minutes just talking, maybe in real practical terms. This person says, I do not find it easy to let go of everything and follow, and I do not know how to develop a relationship and walk with Jesus. So those are, I think that's just gut level honesty that probably a lot of us feel, and we wouldn't feel safe or whatever to say that, but letting go of everything and following, that's a big statement. And then the second statement is, I don't know how to develop a relationship and walk with Jesus. Everybody's different, but what would be, maybe Pastor Scott, what would you say would be like just a starting point?
Well, I think ironically, I would say to this person, if I was sitting down with him or her, I would just say, the fact that you're asking the questions is way further down the road than so many people. You're wrestling with what's real. You're trying to make sense of faith, and you're acknowledging that you have trouble letting go, which is an honest response to a very hard and ethereal type of reality that we're all trying to wrap our heads around.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to let go? That I've really struggled with that question, because on one hand, we're called to surrender, lay down our lives. On the other hand, God, He doesn't want us to abdicate our responsibility and authority that He's given to us on this earth to be agents of the gospel, if I could put it that way, considering the context of our conversation.
Yeah.
So the question, how do I let go? How do I have a relationship with Jesus? I would say, keep asking the questions you're asking. Keep wrestling with those things. Obviously, some of the things that we would all advise is, you know, make the scriptures part of where you go to, you know, I would start with the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the life of Jesus. I would keep engaging with, you know, the messages that we're putting out, and so many others are. I would find community, you know, be around people that can help you take spiritual steps.
Yeah.
But don't dismiss
That's
the
good.
magnitude of the questions you're already asking.
Yeah.
I think that's huge.
Yeah, it's good. It's really good. We're all struggling some level, and questions are part of developing our faith. And I think we said it on here before, but my encouragement would be that if you have a question, let that propel you towards an answer, not repel you from Jesus. You know what I mean? Let that burn so deeply in your heart that you've got to find the answer for that, versus this doesn't make sense, or I don't have an answer. This whole Jesus thing is no good.
Yeah.
And that so often that's just an easy out often. But keep climbing and keep pressing towards, keep propelling towards the answer, because you will find it.
Yeah.
Find it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, guys,
So good.
thanks for your time. This has been really good, really insightful. My very, very favorite things to talk about is the gospel, the good news, and just how expansive it is, and how sometimes we have and continue to try to boil everything down to one word or one sentence answers, and you can't do that with an infinite God. You just can't do it. So
Yeah.
those sentences can be true, but they're always going to limit just the absolute magnitude of who God is. So any final thoughts? Again, if you're watching this and you haven't seen the message, we want to encourage you to go back and watch it, or as you watch the next one in line and you catch it before we record this, get a question in, say what at brooklake.org. But any last thoughts, Mason?
No, appreciate if you're watching right now, I appreciate you tuning in. You can go to mynextbeststep.org, and you can do all kinds of stuff there to help you in your journey following Jesus. You can contact us if you need help. I want to echo what Pastor Scott said in response to that last question. I think one of the biggest things that helps us grow is community, is people. So, gosh, I wish COVID-19 wasn't a thing and that it was a little easier right now to be involved in community, but you can find some options at mynextbeststep.org. I encourage you to do that if you haven't already. Just get around other people as often as you can to help process. Community is a gift. So we're here for you. Our church family is here for you. And I just appreciate you guys tuning in.
Yeah. Amen.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
See you next time.
Later.